Okay. We will begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Fragments of silicon. Fireworks are not required, but are recommended.
Greetings and salutations, and welcome to a very special 4th of July episode of Fragments of Silicon. Apologize for the music mix-up. Our stream operator is just woke up not too long ago.
Mhm.
Coffee is always important for people who need it.
Yes. Yes. And if failing that, then I suppose crystal meth will do it.
Ugh.
I
Well,
don't live
it
in
is
Florida. That's
Missouri,
not
so-
easily accessible.
I'm like, fair enough. Anyway, this is our final European interview of the season. And joining us this week is, forgive me if I mispronounce your name. I've been trying to figure it out all week. Galip.
Yes. Hello. This is Galip
Galip.
from
There-
Istanbul.
Okay. Galip of Zoetrope Interactive.
Hello.
Yes. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, thank you. It's been busy since we have released our latest game, Conarium, on 6th of June, and we are actually continuing with other console versions at the moment, so a bit busy because we want to finish them as quickly as possible because we have a lot of feedback that they want to play the game on console. So this how can I say, it's busy, but it's a nice busy thing we are having here.
Duly noted. Like, right. Before we get into like Canarium and the console versions and all that, we like to start things by getting to know the person behind the game, behind the studio, behind the whatever, and we like to ask them how they got interested in video games in the first place.
Okay, we're just three people living in Istanbul. I think we get to know each other about 19 or 20 years ago when we are just teens, and we were just like we all loving playing adventure games of those times, and then we came together and decided to make games, and this is how our adventure started actually. But it took us a lot of time to actually make games because we were very inexperienced, and in Turkey it was not easy to find enough resources to make games. The internet was not so popular, and other things were there, and we finally managed to make our first adventure game. It was a panoramic adventure game called Darkness Within in 2003, and followed with Darkness Within 2 in 2007, and they were all just adventure games. It had some point and click stuff, and first game was a panoramic game, and second was a first person 3D game. And actually, since we are doing loving adventure games, we wanted to use the themes, and the team were also very keen on actually loving the works of H.P. Lovecraft, and then we decided to use his themes and storytelling in our games as a main theme, because this is basically the main acts of our games. They're all Lovecraftian adventure games, and it contains a lot of references and similarities with this excellent work. So after developing 2 games, we had to give a pause development for about 5 years due to our personal struggles in Turkey. But it was not easy to run a small studio and doing games. There was a lot of difficulties here in our lives. So, but after and then this team come up and our publisher, Iceberg Interactive, made an offer to us to bring the games, bring the Darkness Between games to Steam. And then we ported the game to Steam, and they did pretty well actually. And then we decided to make another adventure, coming together and doing another game. So that's how we started making Conarium about 2 years ago, and finally finished and available at the moment. So I don't know if it's some up to your question, but it's basically like this is basically our story.
It's certainly an interesting one.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I believe you're our first Turkish developers. I suppose my next question is, what is the dev scene in like Istanbul and Turkey like right now?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think we can be considered the first developer in Turkey making an international game, because we didn't make the first games for Turkey exclusive. They weren't even Turkish language, which we were criticized a lot because of that. And I think, yes, we are the first international game maker here. And at the moment, there are some more other international developers doing some really nice projects, but the development is mostly on mobile games. So there are a lot of mobile developers, a lot of newcomers to the scene, and the universities begin to open senior degree program for game design and development. It is very few at the moment. So people are getting educated to build games. So it is actually accelerated a lot and praising the numbers. But at the moment, I can't say there is a very serious scene, but it is developing. And the government is also became aware of the game industry and trying to support the new developers. But at the moment, I don't think it's enough for them to make really good titles. So that's how it is now at the moment in Turkey.
That is pretty fascinating. It's like, now we always like hearing about how development scenes are doing in places you don't hear about in like Western media and such. And it does sound similar to other places from other developers we've talked to now, but Southeast Asia comes to mind. It's like a lot of mobile, not a whole lot of console PC developers in the region. Anyway, moving forward. So, where did the whole love affair with Lovecraft come from?
Well, the love of Lovecraft come from our love for his works. Actually, I can say we especially love the way he sifted. I think this is the right word for it. Sifted the reality with his seal of creativity and mixed the results with his fiction. And he is also using using the intertextuality, and this is very fascinating, I think, because he has a lot of references to a lot of traditions, mythologies, other fiction. I think I'm not just talking about the fictional things. He's actually using birth mythology, and he's a very, very, very talented writer. And I don't know if you have read enough of his small stories or such, but he's very fascinating. And we noticed that using his references and his pointers, because he has a lot of pointers. If you know how to look at the stories, and decided that, oh yes, we can use this style, and we can use his mythologies, and we can use his universe, because his universe is actually our universe. It is not. It's, I can say it is 100% fictional. He's also using word mythologies and other available information to create his own stories. So this style actually very wanted to have build games using those, and actually the main I guess point of stories like humans' insignificancy in the universe, and we call them, it's a very getting popular being called cosmic horror, is not very correctly used in games, because in games, you want to win, you want to be the special one, but it is very difficult to adapt that you are just a very unimportant thing, and end of story is not happy ending. So it is a challenge, but I think it's a very nice challenge to work on. And I can say that I can actually sum up the reason we are loving his works. Actually, we wanted them, we found them very unique to be translated to a game. I think that's it. It answers the question.
I think it does. I mean, and it certainly does shine through in Canarium. I'm not sure if you saw, but we did a review of the game last week, I believe, and I noted the game is pretty Lovecraftian in its design, and see, this is kind of something that's hard, that may be hard to get across to those who don't know like the style of Lovecraft, because honestly, like Lovecraft is kind of hard to adapt, because especially since I've seen a lot of Lovecraft adaptations just get it so wrong. They'll add modern horror movie tropes to a work, and that's just not Lovecraft.
Lovecraft doesn't really do jump scares. It's hard to give too much agency to the players in a Lovecraftian story, because most of the characters in the stories don't have that much agency. That's kind of the point of cosmic horror.
Yeah, and there is also the problem of the cosmic horror itself.
Yeah, it is very hard to convey. I admit it is. Actually, I can say we are not 100% sure that we have built a 100% Lovecraftian game. So we had a lot of ideas in the beginning of the development, and we had to drop them because they were really, really hard to implement, and we lost a lot of time and couldn't get results. Actually, I must admit, we haven't do a lot of things that we want to do. So I think it is a challenge, but I think it's a nice challenge, because a challenge makes you better, and that's why we haven't give up yet.
Okay, well, it seems like you've done a better job to start with than a lot of other games do. So,
thank you.
Yeah, it's just you're never 100% going to get Lovecraftian horror across, because, well, it's a visual medium, and you do have to describe the indescribable horror in some fashion.
Yeah, it is very difficult to explain to the player, because I think most of the players are expectations are different. So when you say horror, maybe I think today's horror is getting mostly about being chased or some action elements in it. And I think when you put it into a Lovecraftian environment, those monsters chasing you, or their representations, may not be may not be perceived very terrifying. You just ruin some of them in any way. So I think in Konami we failed. Actually, I think we failed to make those representations because they require a lot of
Right.
working with the details, and so it is. I don't think it is very. How can I say? I think it is very hard to do in the way the players are used to have horror games right now. So it's just, I think in Konami we want to show people that this can be also a horror game without jump scares, or it may have some different feel. So I think if this was perceived by the players who don't know about Lovecraft, I think we already accomplished something. I believe that. But we will see because we haven't. The game is very new at the moment, and we will look at the response and try to come up if we failed or succeed. But our initial thoughts that we did fail doing a horror representation of these creatures and monsters. I think that happened like that in our station.
Right, and it is worth noting that even though Lovecraft does have a lot of cosmic horror, he does have a lot of horrors that are much more defined, like the lizard people, which actually play a prominent role in Conarium.
Lizard people, yeah. Well, in a lot of mythos and the stories, those lizard-like people use a lot, and this is also a reference, of course. And in Conarium, we also, in Dr. Spin games as well, we use lizard people or some crocodile, half crocodile people, which is also a reference to ancient Egypt. And actually, this is because because the way that he describes them, we used it directly. We didn't want to add a lot of our, interpret. We don't want to made up new kind of creatures and try to respectful to his descriptions. So there's, for instance, there's an elder thing in the game. Actually, there's not an elder thing, but there's a statue of elder thing, and we want to make it as close as possible to his description in the book. So you don't want to ruin it because it's a Lovecrafting game. Lovers of Lovecraft should notice them immediately. That's why we use lizard people, because it's very common. Yes.
Right, and drawing upon those lines, for those who don't know, Conarium is not just based off of the Lovecraft book At the Mountains of Madness. It's actually a kind of a sequel.
Yeah, it is kind of a sequel, but the story doesn't continue. I mean, actually, it takes place in timeline after the events of Mountains of Madness, but the reason we still have an expedition crew like the one in the book, but this expedition crew is completely there for a different reason, and their location in the Antarctica is completely different compared to the one in the book. And this was also explained one of the documents in the game. And just we know about the experiences of the previous crew in the book, but this is completely another story, and we are there for a completely different reason. And this is actually the main plot of the game, which I can't explain for the players who haven't played it. And the Conarium name actually, I think you would eventually ask that, what is Conarium? Or should I explain it now, or wait for another question? What do you say?
I think we came up with it's an item in the game, right?
Yeah, in the game description we say it is a device, but it is more than that. Actually, it is a concept of the pineal gland. It is actually a gland in our body, very close
Okay.
to the brain, and it has a very mythical representation. Like, for instance, the philosopher Descartes says it is the seating place of human soul, and it is somehow connected to some, I can say, beyond human capacities. So it has some connection with that. So actually, our main character in the game is an anthropologist who had put a lot of work on the pineal glands. So things will be explained in the game, but the reason why they are working on pineal gland, which is the Latin of conarium. Actually, the Latin word for pineal gland is conarium. And this is actually the name of the device they have invented somehow, but we don't know how they invented it and what does it do, and these all will be explained. So this is just a mystery game, so there are a lot of questions explained in the game, and I can say it is just not only a device; it's a concept, and it's a very traditional and mythological description test behind it. So that's why we use the name. It is actually our reason to be there, to be in Antarctica.
Okay.
So
right. I didn't know it was it was Latin for the pineal gland. That makes sense though.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is something that comes up in the text of the game. Like, it's not something that it is obvious from the outset. And, there's a lot of lore in the game. A lot of it is optional and missable.
Yeah, exactly.
Another aspect I'm wondering is cultural translation. Given that you guys reside in Turkey and Lovecraft is a very American thing, was there any concepts or ideas that you had trouble with in understanding?
Actually, no, not at all. Their concepts and the things is telling is actually belongs to world's history and mythology. So I think it is very common and how can I say unique to the world we live. So everybody can understand that, I believe.
Yeah, I think most Lovecraft stuff is translated very well. It's just that a lot of his personal
if you are talking
hang-ups.
about the Turkish translation, we read him in English. Turkish translations came very lately, so I have read a couple of them. They were nice, but when we're developing the game, they were in English. Not very. Most of the stories were not translated to Turkish those times.
And like the concepts of the cosmic horror and stuff are fairly universal. It's just that a lot of Lovecraft's personal hang-ups and stuff that informed his writing style are very American and English-centric.
Very New England.
Yeah, actually, we had a lot of difficulties to comprehend his British and usage of ancient words of English. So, but in any case, it is surprisingly you are able to feel it. You don't understand maybe the word exactly on what is referenced, but it leaves a sensation. It's very interesting, actually. You may not understand the whole sentences or miss some of them, but it leaves a feeling, and that's very, how can I say, maybe magical with his works.
This is
Mhm.
true.
So I can say I had a little difficulty, and then also compared to once English paragraph with a Turkish translation later on. Somehow I think it didn't differ so much. It was just some kind of in I can say in English it's institutional, right? not
Mhm.
not 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 directly mind and translation thing, but it's institutional. You can get it. It's very interesting. Actually, I'm not so much of a fan of Lovecraft as my teammates, which unfortunately not here today because of some personal things they had to do, they had to go. But after I began to read Lovecraft, I began to understand what they are talking. So yes, there are some there had been difficulties, but not many, blocking type of.
Well, that's certainly interesting to hear. And well, shifting to At the Mountains of Madness itself, was there any particular reason why this served as the basis of Cornerium?
Well, actually, the story of the game developed during our development. We just first started to make a game of Mountains of Madness. So we wanted to make a direct adaptation of the story. But after the time went on, we decided we understood that it is very, very, very difficult to convey as a whole story. And we had some other problems because there was already a game called Mountains of Madness. You may know it. So
Mhm.
maybe it's made by another group. And we then decided that, okay, we are not going to make Mountains of Madness, but we can use the setting and everything and make our own story, just we did in Darkness Within and Darkness Within. And then in early stages of development, we decided to keep the Mountain of Madness, setting, but do another story. So yes, our first intention was the direct adaptation. So that's why it stayed, it stayed in the final game.
And right, so we've talked a lot about the Lovecraft writing side, but shifting over to the game side, were there any particular horror games that informed the development of Quinarium?
You mean we are inspired of?
Yes,
Uh,
like Resident Evil,
well,
Silent Hill, what have you.
yeah, we have as for games, we all have some different tastes. I personally love Silent Hill series, but I can say the game is inspired by Silent Hill you know in some concepts, but um, I just can't give a specific name, but we we played a lot. We played several horror games or psychological horror games, and we had some ideas. But I can't particularly say game is also placed two different compared to similar games. For instance, we really like Soma from fictional games. We love their storytelling and I think they are doing a very successful job. And other than that, I can say a specific game that especially we had borrowed ideas from. So yes, we have been playing other games as well.
And has the game been compared to like other indie horror games, like say Penumbra or Amnesia and what have you?
Mm. Well, the main difference is this game is not action-oriented horror game. I mean, you are not being chased by other beings and killed. There are some instances in the game we use such action. I mean, run and hide things a bit, but the main mechanic of the game is not based on that. But the main mechanics in the game, I can say, solving puzzles and interacting with the environment and exploration, because the areas we will be visiting is quite inhuman and different. So there will be a lot of exploration about place where we are, and they are very strange, inhuman things. This takes our attention. So game is most like a puzzle solving adventure exploration game, and with some psychological horror elements. But players shouldn't expect jump scares or monsters, fall on them. It's not a monster maze game, and they will be constantly under danger of something if they make sound or do something wrong. But there are some cases they can die, but this is not very common in the game. So it is not. If I compare to Amnesia, it's not the same game. It's a completely different game.
No, I know. It's just there's a kind of a stereotype of what indie horror looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen like the designation, like hide and seek, applied to a lot of indie horror games.
Yeah, correct. And we actually avoided those kind of things. We didn't use them in the game, and they are not a main mechanic in the game.
And
there are some instances, but they are not. They are not very difficult to overcome. We didn't want to do that. So some people say, is it a walking simulator? Well, it's up to the person. If you are a really smart person with solving every puzzle, it may feel like a walking simulator because you are constantly overcoming the puzzles. But if you are not so good at puzzles, and you can think that some of the puzzles are really maybe struggling for you. So it's, I think, safe to say it's an exploration game.
Mm-hmm. And well, it's like having played and beaten the game. It's definitely not a walking simulator. It's honestly, it's more akin to a first-person point-and-click adventure game. Like, it's like I found the puzzles reminiscent of LucasArts or Sierra games.
Really?
It's like maybe not so much in the maybe more Myst style, but it's definitely puzzles I've encountered before kind of design. But I've played a lot of adventure games. So, the point I'm trying to get across is there is quote unquote actual gameplay within Conarium. For those who are just concerned that you just move in the game.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not so easy to move then. Yeah, not so easy to move, but there will be always people who are very smart at puzzle solving. I think those people try to come up with this walking simulator idea.
Right. And is the game made in UE4, Unity, custom engine?
It is UE4, yes, Unreal Engine. We also have a developer grant from Unreal Engine. Since Epic liked our graphics or something. So it's complete Unreal Engine game.
Was it a difficult implementation to mix the two engines?
You mean using Unreal Engine, or because you just used it? You didn't use any other software and other things?
Or rather, from what I've seen, your first two games used a custom engine.
Yes, it's in-house custom engine. Well, I personally, since I'm the engine programmer and guy in the group. I can say I didn't have much of a difficulty because since I have experience in writing my own engine from zero, and I had a lot of concept stuff I learned by myself. Unreal Engine adaptation was quite smooth for me actually, and I liked the way they presented tools to the developer, and I think it's very easy to use, but also easy to make very big mistakes also, because especially on the optimization side, because you can easily make a game, but you can have spikes in the frame rate and cannot really optimize, and that is where someone more maybe technical knowledge is needed. So for me, it was not a problem. I didn't have any difficulty. Maybe no, I wouldn't say that. Okay, it was nice because sometimes the engine crashes a lot. That was the only difficulty I had. But other than that, it was nice for me.
Right, and I suppose I should ask how the job porting the game to consoles is going.
Um, so it is going nice. At the moment, I'm working on the Xbox version. It's translated very well. I think we won't have to sacrifice much from quality. Um, Running stable. There are a few bugs, and it's going nice. So I can say, but I can't say anything about. We haven't started PlayStation 4 port yet, but in the future, I think we will start. I think it's something between our publisher. They're trying to contact with Sony, so I think it will eventually happen, but not at the moment.
And I suppose I should ask: has there been any consideration in bringing Canarium to the Switch?
Well, it is up to our publisher, I think, because they see potential, then we can give it a try. But at the moment, we have no plans. I didn't, and they didn't mention it about. They didn't mention it about to us either. But technically, I think it's maybe a big challenge because the graphics wise, but at the moment we are not on that. I have no idea basically.
Having spoken to people who work on the Switch, it would be a challenge in some regards. Primarily in the field of fidelity, because the Nintendo Switch simply isn't as powerful as, say, a PlayStation 4.
Yeah, that's it. So it will be a completely different game in graphics department. And I think the main problem is Conarium is completely we use dynamic lighting in Conarium completely, and I think it will be very difficult to convert a game into a static lighting, and that would to boost up the performance. And I think that would be very time consuming. So I think I agree with those views that you share.
It's definitely possible. I'm not sure if it would be a completely new game graphically, because I do know the Switch supports UE4, but yeah, it's probably not going to look as good as
require a lot of optimizations as far as I see it.
Yeah. And speaking of which, are you in terms of optimizations, are you targeting like the Xbox One X in terms of specs, or is it going to be like 1080p?
Well, Xbox One S is probably it's a strong possibility, and maybe a 4K version is possible. But considering it's very, very strong compared to Xbox One, but again, I say it all depends on the publisher's view. They say, please do that. Could you do that? And I say, okay. But if they say Xbox One X, let's go for an Xbox One X version. Also, we wouldn't say no.
Fair enough. Fair enough. I suppose my last question is, can you speak to anything beyond the porting of Canarium at this point in terms of projects, or is that still under wraps?
You mean about other projects?
Yes.
Yeah, well, I would love to say something positive, but Canarium is taking all of our development time at the moment. And since we just finished the project and released it, I think we need some time to think about what we will do next. So it is very, very, we are very unsure at the moment what we are going to go next, and try to, because we worked very hard to finish Canarium on time. And I can say we have time to think about it. So I can say I can talk about other projects, but
fair enough. Fair enough. All right.
Thank you.
I'll see if my cohorts here have any last questions.
Everything I was gonna ask has already been answered.
Yeah, I think I got most of my questions in.
All right.
Hey, Dan.
All right. So, Galip, I'd like to thank you for joining us this morning or / afternoon.
So, yeah, it's 7 p.m. here at the moment.
Yeah.
So thank you guys for the interview, and have a nice day.
Indeed. So that'll about do it for this 4th of July edition of Fragments of Silicon. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, 9 o'clock, for our Season 7 finale, as we welcome David Fox of, among other things, Electric Eggplant and Terrible Toy Bots. It's been a while since we've had a veteran of this caliber on the program. He was one of the earliest employees at Lucasfilm Games. Worked on games like Rescue at Fractalus, Zack McCracken, the Monkey Island game, so on and so forth. Most recently, he had a big part in the development of Thimbleweed Park. So, it's like there's going to be a lot to cover here. It's like it may run long. It may, it's like we may have to cut the topic of discussion. Hopefully, we won't, because we have a lot to say about the Super NES Mini. So be sure to tune in on our usual time to hear all of that. And in the interim, I wish you good gaming.